Coming up to this episode, how is Europe responding to young people's concerns about the unemployment, the discriminations in our societies? How is trying to help refugees? What is doing to promote and protect the cultural diversities? Stay tuned to find out. This is Gkioka. Welcome to Actua-TV. Welcome to your Europe. Last week, the European Parliament in Strasbourg opened up and welcomed the European Youth Event. During the opening of the event, MEP Sylvie Guillaume encouraged youngsters to take the opportunity and tell what kind of Europe they really want, a suggestion that was received warmly. Thousands of young people from all over Europe showered Strasbourg seats, and thousands of ideas stormed in and grew into debates and demands for solutions to the problems of our days. Actua-TV is transferring the concept of I on your Europe screen by inviting two young students to interview two members of the European Parliament. What concerns them the most? The unemployment, the discriminations in the workplace, the refugee crisis, and the need to protect further cultural diversities. Joining me to this episode, two members of the European Parliament, Mrs. Guillaume from France, welcome. Mrs. Wards from the United Kingdom, they are both from the Party of Socialists and Democrats, welcome. And two young students, 24-year-old Camina studying law and 18 years old Anouk, that is a school student, right? Is this your last year in school?
Yes.
Okay, good luck with that.
Thank you.
So, to begin with, Camila, your first question goes to?
Mrs. Guillaume. So in our days we have a quite high unemployment rate in all European countries, and especially among young people and even well-educated people. So does European Parliament does something to tackle this situation?
Yes, we've been trying to tackle this situation either for young people and adults, because as you probably know, the austerity politics coming from the Commission and IFM have been eating a lot, especially in some countries. In Greece, for instance, more than 50% of young people are hit by unemployment. So, considering that was not the good solution, we in the Parliament, and especially in the Socialist and Democrat group, tried to push up one idea that came to an end and to a decision around supporting those people who are called NEET, neither in training, neither at work, and neither at in a school. And this is a youth initiative that we decided to push up. This is to support people who have been unemployed or out of work or out of school for 4 months. I think that's very important, not to let them drifting in their life and lose hope in the future. This is what we have been doing and pushing, and what the Commission decided with our support.
So your next question, I think, is your turn, goes to?
Mrs. White. I would also want to ask a question on the topic of employment. How do we make sure all people get the same chances when trying to find a job? Because there's still a lot of discrimination at work.
Well, the European Union stands against discrimination and acts against it. And what we have to do is to remind member states that they need to apply European values and principles when they making policy about employment. But I think we can be also very proactive in this area. So when we recognise that certain groups are victims of discrimination or they're marginalised, then we need to make extra efforts to include them, to support them, to help them. For example, in the rural north of my region, the largest ethnic minority, Gypsy Romani people. And so we have to have particular inclusion mechanisms for them, things that are targeted, and sometimes that's training and support. It's not necessarily the job, but it might be training and support. It might be employability skills. You know, it might be a whole load of really practical things like literacy. Also, I think we can be looking at different kinds of employment as well. Young people are often very entrepreneurial in their thinking and their vision and their ideas. And then we need to find ways of giving them support for startups, giving them help to get their own ideas off the ground.
Camila, would you like to keep up with your next question?
So the cultural diversity has been on a spotlight of both Commission and European Parliament for decades. And having seen our society divided in front of the terrorist attacks and maybe sometimes misjudging the Muslim culture, and out of fear. So cultural diversity seems been like more to be in a need of further promotion and protection. And does European Parliament do something about it, because it's very on topics nowadays? And I'm a Muslim, so about that.
Thank you very much for the question. It's very important for me because I represent the northwest of England, including the big city of Manchester, which is one of the most multicultural cities in the UK, in fact in the world. And I represent a very big Muslim community, so I'm very mindful of the Islamophobia that they're on the receiving end of right now. You said that that perhaps the attacks, the terrorist attacks, had divided our community. But I want to suggest otherwise, because after the bombing attacks here in Brussels, the square was filled with people of all different cultures coming together to say, this is not us, all right? So let's not forget that when a few people with extreme ideologies of any description, from any faith, from any political persuasion, when a few people commit atrocities, hundreds and thousands of millions of people stand up against it. So I think in a way it shows us how our societies can be very cohesive.
You just describe here one factor for us, or one program that Parliament takes to prevent radical beliefs or to protect ordinary Muslims. I think this is what you meant.
Well, there are lots of programs. Creative Europe is the funding stream for lots of arts projects, and many of those projects can be projects that are working on intercultural dialogue. It's up to communities to bid for the funding, but the programs exist. I was really glad recently to see that the Commissioner Navracsics had actually brought forward a program for communities to work with refugees, and not in fact just with refugees, but perception of refugees. And I think that might be what maybe is part of your question, you know, because the refugee crisis has in a way put the Muslim community at the forefront of any kind of attack. So I think this program is really, really important, and it's an arts program. So it's a program that will use arts and cultural tools to address the perception and the treatment and the inclusion of refugees. And it needs to happen in communities it needs to happen in communities where there are refugees, but it actually needs to happen in communities where there aren't refugees. Many of the communities in the UK haven't got any refugees, and they are often the communities that are speaking out the loudest about this, because when you don't encounter the other, you become afraid. So actually it's the being in the same space together, doing an activity together, that really makes a difference.
Anouk, your final question is, I guess, to Mrs. Guillaume.
Yes, how are we as Europe helping the refugees who come?
How should I say? You probably guessed we have a huge crisis related to migration. This is not a spontaneous crisis. We know what is the cause of that. There's the war in Syria, and hundreds and thousands and millions of people are fleeing because they are in danger. Europe knew it would happen. And European Parliament said, and very loud, it could happen, and that people would love to have a shelter and find protection in the EU. But I guess neither member states or commission did really hear what we said at that time. So now we are in the middle of a huge crisis that could be, let's say, a crash test to Europe. We've been facing a crash test with the economic crisis, which has not ended yet. But this migration crisis is probably more important as a crash test, because it points what something that is to me very important. It is solidarity between member states and between all the stakeholders in the EU, and we have to watch that solidarity is not anymore active between member states now. Just a word.
Of course.
Because the question was how Europe is helping refugees.
Exactly.
In that case, Europe, the Commission and the Parliament had a general plan, a holistic plan on migration, dealing with the source of migration, the way we integrate people when they come to our countries, and on legal ways to come to Europe. Everything has been pushed out because of this crisis. And so now we are in emergency to protect people. This is what Europe asked the member states to do. Unfortunately, they are not. They are not willing to welcome people in countries. 160,000 people were expected to come to our 28 countries. Less than 1% arrived. And now most of them, by millions, are stuck either in Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and Greece, because our member states are selfish and egoists. So if we want to help people, really, first we have to stop this war, find a way out. Then we have to protect people. Then we have to reallocate people in all member states with a real will to do so. And then I guess integration is going to be all right with people who want to be integrated in our countries. We are in an emergency to welcome those people and to help member states to welcome them. And then we have as well another, let's say, problem is to deal with Turkey. This is a very important partner to Europe. But somehow we are acting with Turkey just like if it was prison keeper. I don't know if it's the right term.
Yes, you're completely clear. Yes.
We try to get rid of the situation. I say we, member states, are trying to get rid of the situation and of the people and leave Turkey to deal with that. That's not a good plan.
To this point with the refugees, I also have to highlight the importance of the human rights.
As long as poverty and fear exists, people try to take advantage of that. This is the case in refugee camps, so we have to be very careful with that. This is the case as well with smugglers.
With smugglers, exactly.
As well, who are earning millions and millions on poverty. So we have to face that, and we have to face something else that Europol said to us some weeks ago, and it is that more than 10,000 minors disappeared when fleeing their country, which means Syria, either Afghanistan or Pakistan or elsewhere. But 10,000 minors, unaccompanied minors, disappeared. This doesn't mean that they are in smugglers' hands or exploiters' hands, but some of them are. But it also means that they decided not to register and not to stay in the place they were welcomed, to go somewhere else, which makes them very vulnerable and even more vulnerable than they were before.
Well, I have to sincerely thank you, all of you, and thank you. See you next week.